Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachael. I'm the Manager of Wastewater Recycling and Alternative Water at the Water Corporation in WA. Basically, my role is to operationally support our regions in delivering these schemes and operating every day to achieve compliance, health and now environmental compliance. I've chosen a slightly different scheme again from the other presenters. We've got lots of schemes as well. Most of ours are permanent schemes. I've chosen a transient scheme. I'm not sure if that's going to come up in the questions, but thought it might be quite interesting for the audience. The project is to develop a recycled water standpipe for irrigation and dust suppression in Karratha. Now, for people who don't know where Karratha is, it's in the booming northwest of WA. Karratha is a city which actually probably sits at about 20 to 25,000 people maximum. Its population is estimated to grow to 50,000, so it's going to double. And basically, there's not enough potable water to cover people at the moment, so there are restrictions already. And there's too much wastewater and not enough hydraulics to get that wastewater out to recycling. And so all of the potable water is at restricted level, and basically there's limited sources available. So even if you get a customer to come up and say, we want to use potable water for dust suppression, you may only get it for a year, maybe not much more than that. Which, as you can imagine, is a significant problem for us because we're meant to support development, and there's a lot of housing subdivisions going in this area to support the mining boom. And so because we don't have the hydraulics to move the water through our existing recycling scheme, we have lots of overflows to the environment out of our plants. These overflows basically flow immediately around the plant. These are areas which aren't accessed by people, so it's basically the bush, but our regulator still doesn't really like it that much. And also it's important to note that Karratha is in the northwest of WA, as it gets a lot of cyclonic rain as well, so we get overflows just from rainfall too. So this is Karratha. I apologise for the scale of the picture. Basically, we've got two treatment plants. I should always say, can you spot them? There's one over there where you can see basically about 9 ponds, and there's one over here as well where you can see several cluster of ponds too. That one's K2 and this one's K1. We're very clever at our naming. And the plant I'm talking about is K2, which is the plant over there. And the green hashed area is the Gap Industrial Estate. So we're talking about housing estates and we're talking about industrial estates as well for Karratha. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got 2 treatment plants in Karratha, and at the moment they've got a scheme running off each of them. It's for public open space, and basically it's the only disposal. So we have no environmental disposal approved for Karratha. So every night of the year, the wastewater is pumped out onto ovals and parks throughout the town, even when it's raining. So you can imagine sometimes in cyclonic weather, we've got some very, very wet ovals. The K1 is going to be upgraded, or currently in the process of being upgraded. It's being upgraded to increase its capacity to cope with more wastewater flows, but it's also being upgraded to increase its treatment processes to allow more uses of recycled water in the future, particularly a much higher quality water. The intention was to look at third pipe and other opportunities for housing subdivisions in the future. Unfortunately, whilst it's getting upgraded, the city's still booming, so people still want to use the effluent right now. And the water coming out of K1 and K2 is pretty average. They're pond plants, completely overloaded. Basically, we're lucky to get 1,000 E. coli coming out of them that we're irrigating onto ovals, which I need to say is outside of the requirements of our DIH approval guidelines. So when we upgrade K1, we're going to divert all the flows from K2 via a pipeline to K1. The only problem is that there's a reuse scheme connected to K2 at the moment, so we have to connect the reuse schemes to be able to connect the treatment plants. And overflows can't be recycled because of the hydraulics. Okay, so basically we also have off our schemes continuous irrigation, so because we've got so much wastewater, we just set up sprinklers at the back of the plant and just irrigate to evaporate basically. I know it's probably not normal to hear these kind of stories, but this is what happens in the northwest of WA, so it's purely disposal. And it's such a shame because there's so many users who like to use that water. So we said, how about we use the existing standpipe, which is at K2, get it to a quality department feel happy with, and use that for dust suppression. And interestingly, Landcorp and a lot of other major organisations were very interested to hear that, particularly because they wanted to stop paying restricted prices for dust suppression. So the standpipe was replaced, but it was never used. Basically, there was no design internally for how you treat recycled water for dust suppression, so we had to try a couple of different things, and someone came up with a clever idea for glass filters. And it's probably important to note that looking at that picture, there's not much out there. We've got one operator that runs probably about 5 of our treatment plants across the Pilbara, so we're not talking about high-tech equipment or high-tech people, even high-tech assets. So we decided to use the treatment plant for the continuous irrigation, so the glass filters and the disinfection unit, and run that through the standpipe. One of the recipients who came and said, yep, we'll take recycled water. Basically, they wanted to use it at the Gapridge industrial estate for irrigation purposes, so they were setting up landscaping which was apparently not meant, once they'd established it, it was self-sufficient, cyclonic weather would water it. So we had to submit an approval document to DOH for that. So what do we do? So there are our ponds there, and you can see a little standpipe. Luckily it's on our land, so we had no land issues there. We had to allow access, and we even got a bit of a driveway so the trucks could turn around and come in. And there were some treatment upgrades that were happening as part of the continuous irrigation, and we had to provide advice on what disinfection was required as well. So that's what it looks like. We set it up with a nice little touchpad, so unfortunately, for the standpipe in, people go and use it unless you secure it. So we had to set that up. And set up validation monitoring. Now, all of this is really important because, as I mentioned to you, our current effluent doesn't achieve the requirements for irrigation purposes of POS of less than 1,000. Every time it's meant to be sampled. For dust suppression, in the GeoHealth guidelines of WA, it's meant to be less than 10. So, number one, we had to be confident that we were going to be giving a consistent and continuous flow of water that the DOH were going to be happy with. So we set up a lot of kit, which we thought would make the DOH more confident in how we ran the scheme to begin with. We trained the recipients, we taught them how to use the instruments, and basically wrote all of the approval documentation for the Department of Health. We also wrote a process control table, so this is an operational plan. It basically tells you what to do and how to run the scheme, and if something goes wrong, what to do. So the project challenges, as I mentioned, we don't get great water out of these current treatment plants, so we had to basically work with the Department of Health to convince them that irrigating from a tanker for basically plants in an industrial estate out in the middle of nowhere is basically the same as POS, and subsequently which could only achieve the less than 1,000 E. coli. That took some work, but the Department of Health agreed with us on that. They weren't so keen to focus on dust suppression at that because they still believe people are going to be on site, but we'll take that as our next challenge afterwards. Our corporate pricing people, and I don't know if pricing's spoken about at these kind of workshops, but it is quite critical because basically our corporate pricing people believe that because the recycled water was being used for irrigation purposes, it was community benefit, and so the tankering customer received no supply charge whatsoever for that recycled water, which is a great thing to get customers in, but from our region's perspective, it's no income stream. So they weren't that keen on it. And you have to think about these things when you're putting schemes onto regions. You have to think about what's in it for them. Contractor issues as well, that we have to make sure that the contractors are aware of what they're dealing with and they're going to achieve that compliance because we've got quite a bit of writing on it. So lessons learned in setting up this scheme. Well, it's important to say the scheme is now operational. But you need a dedicated project manager, so you have to keep pushing these projects through. So a project manager has that role of pushing, because every time an obstacle comes up, oh, it's too hard, everyone wants to stop. So I probably highlight that as a critical one. You need a patient customer. Things take time, so tankering customers want the water like that. Luckily we had a customer for irrigation purposes who was a bit of a greenie, who thought this was a really good thing to do and basically told his client that this was worth waiting for and that they were happy to pay for potable water in the short term. Get the regulator on board early, especially when you're going outside of regulatory requirements, and explain the drivers. So we made it clear to our regulator that this is an only disposal scheme, we've got nowhere else to put the wastewater, we've got customers who need it, we've got a booming economy. So, you know, this is actually using the water wisely, as long as we can maintain that public safety requirements. We found that our regulator was more tolerant to accept this high level of risk the more that we were involved. So they see us as the competent organisation, and we had to then extend our responsibility into auditing the tankering scheme ourselves. The lack of a pricing charge means that bill commuter for the region, as I've mentioned, and basically the intent was to establish a wider customer base. Basically, there were a lot of customers who were interested, but we needed to get them on board early, especially when projects were coming over the horizon to tell them what was coming. Positive outcomes, so that's how regulator Richard evolved, and that's how I managed to bring Rachael. It's really important to have a strong relationship with your regulator, and we have that. We forged that with drinking water, and we've taken that on to wastewater and water recycling. So we have the same individual from DOH that does both, which is awesome. Basically, the establishment of a lower cost practical method for delivery of recycled water, and an approval process. So now we have a template which we can use over and over again for new customers that come in. And I just want to acknowledge the people who actually did this work. I may have been involved in the negotiations and the funding, but these are the people who did it. So Clary Hall as project manager, Aaron Lathorne, people from the region, Nathan Conley and Andrew Dukas, and the customer, particularly Francis Burke from Earthcare.